Before you do anything today, before you send that message, before you make that call, before you say the thing you have been rehearsing in your head for the last 48 hours, stop. Just stop for a moment and listen to what I am about to tell you, because March 2nd carries a specific risk that most people will not recognize until after they have already walked into it. If you act impulsively today, you may create damage that takes weeks to repair. That is not hyperbole. That is the specific risk of this 48-hour window, and it applies to communication in particular, to the message you want to send, to the confrontation you have been building toward, to the decision you feel ready to announce. The conditions under which you are operating right now are not the conditions you think they are. What feels like clarity today has a high probability of being something else. And the actions you take from that misidentified clarity will produce outcomes shaped by the distortion rather than by your actual intentions. Mercury is retrograde in Pisces. That has been true for several days now, and each day of this retrograde has brought its own specific quality of interference. But March 2nd sits inside what could be called a fragile window, a 48-hour period where the combination of Mercury's backward movement through the most emotionally porous sign of the zodiac and the current lunar sensitivity creates conditions where the gap between how things feel and how they actually are is wider than usual, where your interpretation of a communication, of a silence, of someone's tone or intention carries a higher than average proportion of your own emotional state rather than the objective reality of what was communicated. In practical terms, this means that the message you send today may not communicate what you believe it is communicating. The confrontation you initiate today may not produce the resolution you are seeking. The decision you announce today may not reflect the clarity you believe you have access to. And the problem with all of these outcomes is that they are not reversible in the same way that waiting is reversible. Waiting costs you a day or two of discomfort. Acting from distorted perception can cost you a relationship, a professional opportunity, or a hard-won connection that you did not actually intend to damage. This is the day to understand that impulse deeply before you act on it. The specific scenario that is most common on a day like this, Mercury retrograde in Pisces, heightened lunar sensitivity, accumulated pressure from weeks of eclipse aftermath and retrograde interference, is the message sent from peak emotional activation. You have been thinking about this person, or this situation, or this unresolved thing for days. The thinking has been cycling rather than resolving. Each time you return to it, the emotional charge is slightly higher, the interpretation slightly more certain, the sense that something must be said or done slightly more urgent. And today, that cycle reaches a point where sending the message feels less like a choice and more like an inevitability. That feeling of inevitability is the thing worth examining most carefully, because it is not the same as readiness. Inevitability is a feeling generated by accumulated pressure. Readiness is a state that requires both clarity about what you are communicating and reasonable confidence that the conditions are right for the communication to land as intended. Under Mercury retrograde in Pisces, those conditions are consistently unreliable. The communication may be necessary. The relationship or situation may genuinely require a direct conversation. But today is not the day that conversation will go the way you need it to go. Consider what the Mercury retrograde in Pisces environment is actually doing to the communication layer of your life right now. Pisces dissolves boundaries, including the boundary between what is being said and what you are hearing, between someone's actual tone and the tone you are filtering it through based on your emotional state, between the objective content of a message and the meaning you are bringing to it from the history of the relationship. When Mercury, the planet of language, logic, and precise communication, moves backward through that dissolving environment, the result is that language stops carrying its usual precision. Words that seem clear to the person writing them arrive with ambiguity to the person reading them. Tone that seems neutral to the sender reads as charged to the receiver. Intention and impact consistently fail to align. This is not a reflection of anyone's character or intelligence. It is a structural feature of this window. You can be someone with excellent communication skills, and still find that your communications during Mercury retrograde in Pisces produce misunderstandings that take considerable effort to untangle. The problem is not you specifically. The problem is the medium, and right now, the medium is unreliable. What makes March 2nd particularly sensitive within this retrograde period is the lunar energy running alongside it. The moon's current position is amplifying sensitivity and projection, the psychological process where your own internal states get attributed to external sources. Under strong projection conditions, you perceive things in others that are actually reflections of your own fears, needs, or emotional reactions. A message reads as critical because you are feeling vulnerable. A silence reads as rejection because you are carrying fear of abandonment. A change in someone's communication pattern reads as withdrawal because you are in a state of heightened need for connection. The perception feels like accurate observation. The evidence supporting it feels convincing. The conclusion it generates feels justified. The problem is that you are not seeing the situation clearly. You are seeing your own emotional state reflected back at you through the surface of the situation. And if you act on that perception, if you send the message that responds to what you believe you are seeing, you are responding to your own projection rather than to the actual person or situation in front of you. That response creates confusion and defensiveness in the other person, who receives communication about something they did not do or intend, and who responds to the confusion in ways that then seem to confirm your original interpretation. The cycle compounds. There is also something important happening on the other side of your communications today, meaning the people receiving what you send are operating inside the same distorted environment. They are reading your messages through their own emotional filters, which are also running at elevated sensitivity. The neutral message you send may land as pointed. The honest expression of how you feel may land as an accusation. The question you ask in good faith may land as suspicious. These are not failures of the relationship or the people in it. They are the specific, predictable failures of Mercury retrograde in Pisces, operating on everyone simultaneously. Something in you wants to act today. That wanting is real, and it is not groundless. The week and a half of accumulated pressure since the eclipse, the days of emotional processing, the cycling between clarity and blur that Mercury retrograde in Pisces has been producing, all of that has created a genuine and significant internal tension that is pressing toward release. The part of you that wants to send the message, or make the call, or have the confrontation, or draw the line, is responding to real pressure from a real situation. The impulse is not irrational. What is important to understand is that acting on the impulse today may close a door you still need open. This is the specific risk that makes March 2nd worth treating carefully rather than simply navigating through reactively. The door you close today, by sending a message that misrepresents your actual position, by initiating a confrontation that escalates past what the situation required, by making a declaration that commits you to a direction based on a reading of the situation that the retrograde is distorting, that door may be one you need access to next week, when the perceptual fog has cleared and you can see the situation with better accuracy. Acting prematurely can foreclose options that genuine clarity would have used differently. Think about the specific scenarios that carry this risk today. The message to an ex, the one you have been composing in some form since they reached out, or since a memory surfaced, or since something this week made the loss or the unresolved feeling more present than it had been. Under Mercury retrograde in Pisces, the emotional pull toward that person is running at unusual intensity. The memory of what was good about the relationship is more vivid than usual. The story you are telling yourself about why reaching out makes sense, about what reopening that conversation might produce, about what you still need to say or hear. That story has the specific quality of Piscean emotional narrative, which means it is compelling and may not be entirely accurate. Sending that message today from inside that narrative is a high-risk action. Wait. If the impulse to reach out is still present and still feels grounded next week, it will still be available to you. If it was primarily Mercury retrograde in Pisces producing the emotional pull, the urge will have shifted significantly by then. The confrontation with someone in your current life about something that has been building, a partner, a friend, a colleague, someone with whom there is unresolved tension that has been accumulating pressure. The confrontation may genuinely be necessary. The conversation may genuinely need to happen. But initiating it today, from the most pressured and emotionally activated version of yourself, into an environment where your words are more likely to be misheard and their responses more likely to be misread, that is not the version of the confrontation that produces resolution. That is the version that produces escalation followed by a longer and harder repair process. Wait for the conditions that make the conversation more likely to go the way you actually need it to go. The sudden decision announced impulsively. The declaration that you are leaving, ending something, changing course, drawing a line. These announcements, made at peak emotional pressure inside a Mercury retrograde window, frequently require significant qualification or walking back once the emotional charge settles. The decision itself may be correct. The timing and the form of its announcement are what create the damage. A decision made clearly and communicated carefully next week will land differently and produce more workable outcomes than the same decision announced from today's activated state. The passive-aggressive or indirect communication that expresses what you have not been saying directly. The subtweet, the pointed comment, the message that seems to be about something else but is clearly about the actual thing. These forms of indirect communication are particularly risky under Mercury retrograde in Pisces because they depend on the other person reading between the lines accurately, and right now, the lines are too blurred for that kind of precision. The indirect message that was supposed to communicate one thing will communicate something else, or nothing, or something worse. If the thing needs to be said, say it directly, but say it next week when saying it directly has a higher probability of being heard as intended. The practical guidance for today runs through a principle that is worth stating plainly. Restraint is the sophisticated response right now, and confusing restraint with passivity or weakness would be a significant mistake. Choosing not to send a message today is an active decision. Choosing to observe rather than confront is a strategic choice. Choosing to let 24 to 48 hours pass before acting on something that feels urgent is the exercise of the kind of self-regulation that produces better outcomes than most impulsive actions do. That restraint is not suppression of what you feel. It is the recognition that what you feel right now is running at a higher level of intensity and distortion than the situation actually warrants, and that the action taken from inside that distortion will need to be managed afterward. Here is the most concrete practical action for today. Draft the message, but do not send it. Write out everything you want to say. Put it in a document, in your notes app, on paper, anywhere that is not the send button. Say the thing fully, say the hard part, say what you have been holding. Write the confrontation, write the declaration, write the honest expression of everything that has been building. Let the writing serve the function that the sending would have served, the externalization of what has been internal, the relief of having put words to it. And then close the document and come back to it tomorrow. When you read it tomorrow, or the day after, several things are likely to be true. Some of what you wrote will still feel exactly right, and that portion is the genuine core of what needs to be communicated. Some of what you wrote will read differently than it did when you wrote it. More extreme, more charged, more colored by the emotional activation of the moment than by what the situation actually requires. That portion is what Mercury retrograde in Pisces was generating, not what the genuine situation requires. The ability to distinguish between the two, which is very difficult today and significantly easier in 24 to 48 hours, is what makes waiting functionally useful rather than simply cautious. Reread recent conversations before drawing new conclusions from them. If an exchange from the last several days has been generating ongoing interpretation and emotional response, go back to the actual words. Read them without your conclusions already formed, as much as possible. Notice where your current interpretation is being supported by the text itself versus where it is being supplied by what you are bringing to the text. That gap, when you can see it clearly, often changes what response the situation actually warrants. Reduce the volume of emotionally significant conversations today where you have any control over it. A conversation that requires mutual accuracy of perception, nuance, and good faith on both sides. That conversation is better positioned in a few days. The situation will still be there. The conversation will still need to happen. Choosing not to have it today does not mean choosing to avoid it indefinitely. It means choosing the conditions under which you have it, and those conditions matter for the quality of what gets produced. If a conversation cannot be avoided, if the situation is genuinely time-sensitive and waiting is not a real option, approach it with the shortest and most neutral version of what you need to communicate. Strip the charge out as much as possible. State the functional core of what needs to be addressed. Ask questions rather than making declarations. Leave room for the other person to respond, and then hold their response with some skepticism about your own interpretation of it before deciding what it means. You are not the only one operating inside a distorted perceptual environment today. The person across from you is too, and their response to you will reflect that. Focus your attention today on observation rather than action. Watch what is happening in your relationships and situations without immediately deciding what it means or what it requires of you. Notice the emotional impulses as they arise, the urge to reach out, to confront, to withdraw, to make something permanent, and treat those impulses as information rather than instructions. Each impulse is pointing at something real. The work is determining what it is actually pointing at, as distinct from what the Mercury retrograde in Pisces environment is adding to it. There is something specific happening at the intersection of emotional sensitivity and misidentified clarity that makes March 2nd worth treating with particular care. The experience of feeling certain under these conditions is not reliable evidence of actual certainty. Pisces dissolves the usual signals that allow you to distinguish between genuine knowing and emotionally generated conviction. When you are inside a strong emotional state under a Pisces influence, the emotional state presents as insight. The fear presents as recognition. The projection presents as accurate observation. The desire presents as intuition. None of these are fabrications, they are real experiences. They are also consistently inflated by the perceptual conditions of this window, in ways that become visible only after the conditions have shifted. The next 48 hours are the most sensitive window of this immediate Mercury retrograde period. What gets said and done in this window, under these conditions, will have consequences that extend past the window itself. The message sent today from peak emotional fog is not going to be interpreted in the context of Mercury retrograde in Pisces by the person who receives it. It will be taken at face value, responded to as stated, and the exchange that follows will proceed from there. Getting that initial communication right matters considerably more than it might seem in the moment of urgency. Hold back. The holding back is not failure to act, and it is not avoidance, and it is not weakness in the face of something that deserves confrontation. It is the deliberate choice to act from your clearest available position rather than from the most activated one. Your clearest available position is 2 or 3 days away. The situation will wait for it. The person will still be there. The decision will still be necessary. The conversation will still need to happen. The difference between initiating from clarity and initiating from emotional fog is the difference between a communication that moves things forward and one that creates new complexity on top of existing complexity. You have enough complexity right now. You do not need to add more through impulsive communication made in conditions that you now understand are not reliable. Let the fog pass. It will pass. Mercury retrograde in Pisces is not permanent. The perceptual environment of the next several days is going to shift, and when it does, the The things that feel impossibly urgent today will show themselves more plainly. Some of them will still be urgent, and you will act on them with more accuracy and more effective communication than you could manage today. Some of them will look different once the fog has cleared, and you will be relieved that you waited. The next 48 hours are sensitive. You know this now. What you do with that knowledge is yours to decide. But the decision to hold, to draft and not send, to observe and not confront, to let the pressure run without immediately converting it into action, that decision is available to you right now, and it is worth making deliberately. Hold back. Act when the clarity is real. What needs to be addressed will still need to be addressed in 3 days, and you will do it better then.